them. The Bible says prophets saw this reality. They did not speak of it as a dream, but as a vision more real than life itself. When we think of a throne today, we imagine power, world leaders with their palaces, presidents in their seats of authority, kings and queens with golden crowns. A throne represents the highest point of rule, but the throne of God is something beyond politics or empires. It is the center of existence itself, the place from which all creation is ruled. Every star, every living thing, every heartbeat finds its order from this throne. Imagine the greatest kings of history, Pharaoh in his golden halls, Solomon on his majestic seat in Jerusalem, or Caesar with Rome's empire at his feet. Yet all their thrones crumble into dust, while the throne of heaven remains eternal. This is not a throne of human pride. It is the throne where justice and mercy meet, where holiness radiates like unapproachable fire, and where beings beyond our imagination stand in awe. Prophets across time caught glimpses of this throne. Isaiah, trembling in the temple, cried out when he saw it. Ezekiel, sitting by the river in exile, described wheels of fire and creatures with many wings. Daniel spoke of the Ancient of Days seated in majesty, while John in Revelation fell down. As he saw the throne encircled with rainbows, lightning, and voices like thunder, they did not invent these things, they witnessed them, and their words still burn with the weight of what they saw. Think of Isaiah's cry, "Woe is me, for I am undone." This was not poetry. It was the reaction of a man who suddenly realized he was standing before a holiness so pure that even angels covered their faces. Think of John, exiled and alone on Patmos. The Roman Empire had tried to silence him, but heaven opened, and he saw the throne of God. That vision still speaks louder than any empire. Why does this matter to us today? Because every human heart longs for justice, for order, for a ruler who does not fail. We look around at broken governments, wars and corruption. We see leaders rise and fall, promises made and forgotten. But the throne of God does not shake. It does not bow to human power. It is the one throne that remains when all others are gone. Yet there is a mystery. Who surrounds this throne? The Bible tells us that it is not empty space. It is not just God alone in a vast hall. Around him are living beings, each one burning with purpose, each one carrying a role in the divine order. Some are called Seraphim, burning ones with wings of fire. Some are Cherubim, guardians of holy things. Some are elders clothed in white, crowned with glory, singing day and night. If you had the chance to stand there, what would your eyes meet? Would you see angels with faces of man, lion, ox, and eagle? Would you see rivers of fire flowing beneath the throne? Would you hear the thunder of voices crying, "Holy, holy, holy"? These are not symbols alone. They are realities so great that the prophets struggled for words. Imagine hearing the sound of wings so mighty they shake the foundations of heaven. Imagine colors not found on earth, brilliance that no artist could capture. Imagine beings who never sleep, never tire, who exist only to worship the one seated at the center. To see the throne is to glimpse eternity itself, and yet, behind all the majesty, there is something deeply personal. The throne is not just about power, it is about relationship. The one seated there is not a distant ruler but a father. The angels who surround him are not robots, but worshippers burning with love. The elders who cast their crowns are not slaves, but honored ones who freely surrender their glory. This is a throne where love and authority meet. The prophets were given these visions, not for themselves alone, but for us. They carried them through history, through scrolls, through the pages of Scripture, so that we could know. Heaven is not silent. The throne is not empty. God reigns, and around him are beings beyond imagination, waiting for the day when the veil is lifted and the whole earth sees what only a few prophets once saw. If your life feels unstable, if the world feels Chaotic, remember this. Above it all there is a throne, and at that throne are beings whose very existence declares that God is in control. They are not watching history like we do on a screen. They are part of the divine order, moving at His command, serving His will, surrounding His presence, and this is where our journey begins, not with myth or fairy tale, but with the most real place that has ever been. The unseen throne of heaven is not locked in the past or distant in the future. It exists right now. It is alive right now. And prophets of old invite us to step into their vision, to see what they saw and to feel what they felt. This is not just a story. It is a call to awaken our hearts, to realize that above our world of noise and confusion, there is a reality, more powerful, more glorious, more lasting, the throne of heaven. And the beings who stand there will be the focus of everything we uncover in this journey together. So before we move deeper, I invite you to take part in this journey with us. If you want to keep learning about these mysteries of the Bible, make sure to subscribe and help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Share this video with friends who are hungry for truth. If you'd like to support, you can use the Super Thanks feature. It helps us bring more of these teachings to life. And I want to know, which city and time are you watching from? Drop your name and city in the comments below. I'd love to see where this message is reaching. And if you want to go deeper, I've left a link in the description for the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English. That treasure is waiting for you. Isaiah wasn't a man ready for what he saw in an instant. The veil between earth and heaven appeared to separate as he stood in the temple, probably surrounded by the well-known stone walls and the sound of incense burning. In an instant, he was looking at the Eternal's throne rather than artificial altars or golden lampstands, and he was deeply shaken by what he saw. He was surrounded by creatures known as Seraphim, or burning ones, who were so brilliant that, even in their innocence, they covered their faces with their wings to protect themselves from God's radiance. They repeatedly exclaimed, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory," in voices that seemed to tremble the very foundations. It was a cry that pierced the soul, thunder wrapped in fire, not human chanting. When Isaiah saw this vision, he was not happy. He lost it. "I'm in trouble, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among unclean lips people. I am undone." No human heart could conceal its imperfections, and to stand before that throne was to stand before perfection. Imagine now that Ezekiel is a prophet sitting among exiles by the Chebar River, far from his native land. He wasn't in a holy city or temple. He was deprived of his country's glory and left in the dust of captivity. Nevertheless, the heavens parted for him there, in the midst of despair. He had never seen anything like what came to him. The indescribable, a storm cloud flashing with fire and creatures of living light emerging from within it, was something he attempted to describe. Each of their four faces, eagle, ox, lion, and man, unveiled a different aspect of God's creation. They never turned as they went, moving in perfect unison. There were wheels beside them. Not just any wheels, but wheels inside wheels, beryl glowy and brimming with eyes that looked everywhere. As if the spirit of the creatures and the wheels were one, these wheels rose and moved with the living things. A firmament glowed like crystal above their heads, and above that was a throne that seemed to be blazing with rainbow brightness and fire. Ezekiel collapsed onto his face. Mortal eyes could not handle the glory he saw. Then came Daniel, who lived in the courts of empires, rather than in a temple or by a river. He had ruled under rulers who commanded armies and insisted on worship, kings who considered themselves gods. However, Daniel was transported into the real court of power in the silence of a vision, transcending Babylon and Persia. He observed the Ancient of Days sitting and thrones being set up. His hair was as pure as wool, his garment was as white as snow, and his throne was a flaming fire with wheels. 10,000 times 10,000 people came to see him, and thousands stood in front of him. Judgment was ready, and books were opened. This scene dwarfed the mightiest monarchs Daniel had ever encountered. Despite Daniel's experience with visions, the fear and gravity of what he witnessed weighed down on him with an insurmountable force. Even though each prophet had a unique perspective, they all shuddered. Isaiah felt ruined when he heard the endless cry of holiness. Ezekiel fell to the ground after seeing unfathomable creatures, wheels, fire, and light. Fear gripped Daniel as he witnessed the majesty of God enthroned above all nations, with innumerable angels serving him. Although their visions differed, they were united by one truth: the reality of God's throne is too immense for human flesh to bear without shuddering. Imagine being Isaiah at that precise moment, seeing your own sin in the glaring light of perfection. If you were Ezekiel, you would see creatures with four faces moving in unison while their wings roared like rushing water. Imagine yourself as Daniel, standing in the midst of innumerable people and rivers of fire in the courts of heaven, and knowing that you are nothing more than dust in the face of such grandeur. Not surprisingly, all of them were undone. The holiness was inaccessible, the glory intolerable. Their testimonies are united not only by what they witnessed, but also by how it undermined their sense of humanity. Isaiah exclaimed that he was unworthy. Ezekiel fell back in wonder. Daniel acknowledged his fear as his strength failed him. Being human means being frail and constrained by sin and weakness. Every disguise must be taken off in order to stand before the throne. These men were mortals abruptly drawn into the presence of eternity. They were not flawless saints exalted on pedestals. Their fear was the normal reaction of dust before fire, not cowardice. Nevertheless, they were not destroyed by their visions. A coal from the altar touched Isaiah's lips, purifying them with divine fire as he trembled in his guilt. Overwhelmed, the Spirit raised Ezekiel and gave him the mandate to speak to his people on behalf of heaven. After being shaken by the sight of divine judgment, Daniel received the courage to confront empires and the wisdom to decipher dreams. They were all strengthened, even if they were broken. Despite their fear, they were all selected. This begs the question: how can frail human beings witness such splendor? In front of the one whose holiness shines brighter than 1,000 suns, how can creatures of sin and dust stand? Human strength does not hold the answer. Daniel lacked the courage. To face the vision, Ezekiel was unable to rise on his own, and Isaiah was unable to purify himself. God was the one who lifted, touched, and reached down in each instance. His strength was displayed on their frailty. Their testimonies continue to reverberate throughout history. They talk about the fear, the wonder, and the realization that God's throne is not a myth from the past, but rather a reality in the here and now. We are given the opportunity to see through their eyes, to stand in their trembling position, and to realize that the same throne is still in existence today, encircled by the same creatures and blazing with the same glory. What would happen to us if Daniel, Ezekiel, and Isaiah could hardly stand it? The idea is heart-shaking enough on its own. Few creatures are depicted in the visions of heaven with as much ferocity as the Seraphim, the flaming guardians who encircle God's throne. They are not gentle creatures, and their name itself is derived from a root word that means to burn. They are creatures of fire, burning with a holiness so intense that they cover themselves in front of the throne even when they are pure. Even though this detail may appear straightforward at first, every gesture and movement has such deep meaning that it makes the reader shudder. Isaiah saw them standing above the throne, each with 6 wings. They concealed even their bright eyes from the one who resides in inaccessible light by covering their faces with two wings. This was a recognition that no created being, no matter how holy, could gaze directly into the face of boundless glory. It was not shame. They humbled themselves by covering their feet with two wings, as if they realized that even the lowest aspect of themselves was unworthy of standing before the Eternal's perfection. And they flew with two, always prepared to move at his command, as quick as fire, never stopping, never hesitating. Each set of wings conveys a message of obedience, humility, and respect. Together, they demonstrate what genuine worship looks like: awe-stricken surrender rather than arrogant display. Their form is frightening, but so are their voices. The sound of their cries shook the temple's foundations, according to Isaiah. Just picture yourself there, under those voices. It wouldn't be an instrument-born sound or a melody like human choirs. It would be a cry so strong that the earth itself might tremble, like thunder and fire colliding. Their constant refrain, "Holy, holy, holy, is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory," calls them to one another day and night. They don't pause or get tired. This eternal declaration consumes their very existence, as if the sole purpose of their creation was to proclaim the holiness of God. However, the Seraphim's fire represents more than just their devotion. The power of fire purifies, consumes, and changes everything it comes into contact with. One of these fiery creatures took a coal from the altar and touched Isaiah's lips as he broke down in terror and confessed that he was unclean and unworthy, declaring that his sin had been atoned for and his guilt removed. The coal was burning with God's holiness, so it was not your typical coal. Nevertheless, a seraph carried it. The fact that they are both merciful and terrifying in their innocence is demonstrated to us in that moment. They bring the fire of holiness into the lives of God's chosen. They do more than just observe it, but there's also judgment in their fire. Not only does fire purify, it also consumes corrupt things. Nothing unworthy can escape the Seraphim's scrutiny. They are the throne's defenders and stewards of its holiness. To visualize them would be to visualize living flames, brimming with fervor, devotion, and unwavering power. They are fiery witnesses of God's incomprehensible majesty, not kind spirits who console the weak. To be in their presence would be to feel as though every secret weakness had been revealed, every transgression rising up like smoke before the fire of their innocence. Imagine what it would be like to be suddenly under their voices if you were Isaiah. The temple you believed to be familiar starts to shake. The ground trembles, the smoke permeates the room, and these creatures above you exclaim, "Holy, holy, holy." The sound is not just in the air. It pierces your heart, shakes your bones, and breaks down your defenses, even if you cover your ears. In that instant, you realize that there are no words on earth that can adequately describe what you are seeing. And one of them comes down with a burning coal that touches your lips as you drop to your knees, unable to take it any longer. The burning agony turns into a purifying fire, and all of a sudden, you are restored. In that instant, the fire heals rather than destroys. It accomplishes what no human effort could. It prepares you to stand where no man should. The seraphim serves as a reminder of God's holiness. It's not something light or informal. Humans cannot handle it easily. It's fire, insufferable, consuming, cleansing, and these creatures stand as defenders and witnesses of that reality, burning with that same fire. They don't hesitate, they don't question, they don't soften their cry. Every action they take demonstrates respect, humility, and obedience, and their entire existence is encapsulated in the declaration of God's holiness. When one considers their 6 wings, one is forced to face the demands of genuine worship, covering the face, admitting that even the most eminent people are unable to see the glory of God, Covering the feet is a sign of humility and an admission of one's inadequacy. Flying, willing to serve, quick to comply, and willing to give up. Without question, they teach us things that words cannot. Worship is surrender, not performance. It's humility, not pride. It's obedience, not laziness. In their flaming presence, the seraphim represent each of these realities. Picture yourself standing there, listening to their voices reverberate forever. The echoes seem to go on forever whenever they utter the word, holy. In a place like that, you wouldn't stand tall and proud. Instead, you would collapse, shaky and unfinished. Your heart would experience both dread and solace, devastation and rebirth. Their coal could cure your weakness, but their fire would reveal it. Their cries would dispel your delusions, but their wings would serve as a reminder that God has selected even the weakest people to understand His holiness. Thus the seraphim remain in place for all eternity, not just for a single moment or 100 years. Their wings never grow weary, their cry never stops, and their fire never goes out. They exist to proclaim the reality that all of creation must eventually acknowledge, that the one occupying the throne is holy beyond description, beyond time, and beyond comprehension. How much more should our hearts tremble when we recall who they serve? If the foundations of the heavens tremble at their voices, Adam and Eve walking into exile is not the conclusion of the story of humanity's fall from Eden. The story introduces the cherubim, a mysterious and terrifying figure, at the garden's gate. These weren't gentle artworks or angels with a childlike appearance. They were protectors, powerful beings who stood between the unspoiled paradise of God's creation and the broken world of humanity. They were accompanied by flaming swords that flashed back and forth, making it impossible for a human hand to ever again reach the tree of life. The image is powerful, fire and wings, the divine presence protecting those who disobeyed from coming back. It was protection, not cruelty. Protecting humanity from eating what would keep them in a fallen state forever is just as important as protecting the holy garden from corruption. The first obvious representation of humanity's separation from God's holy presence at the entrance to Eden was the cherubim. Centuries later, the prophet Ezekiel would recount his vision of creatures that were beyond human imagination. Each of the 4 living creatures, a man, an ox, an eagle, and a lion, has 4 faces. Their feet gleamed like burnished bronze, their legs were straight, and they had man-like hands beneath their wings. They moved without turning, following the Spirit, wherever it led them, and each of the 4 wings touched the others. Like the roar of an army in motion, the sound of rushing waters accompanied their every move, while lightning darted forth and fire flashed between them. The weight of Ezekiel's description, which gives them the name cherubim, leaves us speechless. These weren't just guardians. With their symbols of power, knowledge, agility, and comprehension, they were living mysteries. The ox represented endurance and service. The eagle represented vision and speed, the lion represented authority and power, and the human face represented intelligence and connection. Together, they represented the entirety of creation, as if they carried the essence of the cosmos before God in their very appearance. The Ark of the Covenant was the focal point of Israel's worship, and the cherubim were once more seen on it. 2 cherubim, each made of pure gold, stood facing each other with their wings spread wide, creating a canopy over the mercy seat. God Himself would meet with His people in the space between their wings, where the divine presence would reside. The ark was a throne, not just a hallowed storage space filled with relics and stone tablets, and that throne was guarded by the cherubim. The high priest always walked into the Holy of Holies under the cherubim's wings, entering the exact spot where heaven and earth converged. A profound truth was revealed by their imagery. God's presence is sacred, guarded, and should only be approached with purity and reverence. Knowledge and wisdom are inextricably linked to the cherubim's symbolism. By defending the tree of life, they safeguarded both the divine knowledge that was entwined with it and the path to eternal existence. Their many faces conveyed wisdom that transcends creation itself, according to Ezekiel's vision. Additionally, the ark's wings provided protection for God's law and testimony. The Israelites began to view cherubim as more than just fantastical creatures. They stood for the truth that wisdom is not acquired by coercion and that divine knowledge is not bestowed carelessly. It must be received as God intended because, as Adam and Eve discovered in Eden, to rebel and seek it out is to be exiled. The cherubim has a tension that captivates the imagination. They are guardians who stand close to God's throne and cover his dwelling place with wings of fire and gold, representing his holiness on one side. On the other hand, they serve as reminders of humanity's banishment, standing guard at the garden gates to prevent people from accessing what was once theirs. We are excluded from God's presence by the same wings that provide it. They have a weight that no other angelic figure has because of that striking contrast. They serve as both barriers against human intrusion and symbols of one's closeness to God. They make clear that holiness is both a call to reverence and a warning. Imagine seeing those flaming figures at the entrance to Eden after being expelled and standing in front of its gates. In your heart, you would know that paradise was now permanently closed, not because there was no way, but rather because it was guarded. No mortal eye could look at their flaming swords without fear because of how brilliantly they would flash. You would realize from that scene that sin had built a wall, and the cherubim were its outward protectors. They weren't mean, they were required. Since corrupted flesh could not approach God's holiness, the guardians kept watch until redemption would once more pave the way. This reality is furthered by Ezekiel's vision. The cherubim are dynamic, fire, sound, and motion-filled beings rather than immobile statues. The sound they made when they moved was like rushing water or a powerful army, as if the force that keeps the universe going was embodied in their form. They carried the energy of creation with them. A figure resembling glowing metal sat on a sapphire throne above them, encircled by dazzling light. Seeing the cherubim meant seeing the throne, and seeing the throne meant seeing God's glory. In this sense, they serve as both guardians and bearers of presence, demonstrating to humanity the majesty and awe of that presence. The Holy of Holies in the temple was filled with the image of cherubim. 2 enormous cherubim with wings that span the width of the inner sanctuary were carved by Solomon out of olive wood and covered in gold. No one could stand there without trembling because of how overwhelming they were. Israel was reminded by every detail that the God they worshipped was different from the idols of the neighboring countries. Between the cherubim, he was enthroned, his glory unmatched, his holiness blazing with fire. The image of the cherubim, which was always present in Israelite worship, signaled that the path to God was not open but guarded, and that anyone approaching him had to do so with reverence and fear. Cherubim are depicted as representations of wisdom and vision even in later works. Their piercing eyes and numerous faces were descriptions of understanding as well as form. They were able to see clearly and perceive both the visible and invisible. They stood for the incomprehensible wisdom of God, which was revealed in his creation. Additionally, their inclusion in worship, art, and prophecy served as a reminder to the faithful that God's holiness is always close to divine wisdom. Only the purified can stand in its light, and to seek it is to approach fire. Their greatest strength, however, comes from the contrast they represent. They served as a barrier between life and humanity at Eden. The wings on the ark covered the area where God approached. They carried the throne's glory in Ezekiel's vision. They are guardians and revealers, exclusion and inclusion. Their wings made room for God and man to meet. While their flaming swords blocked access, they proclaimed judgment and mercy, intimacy and distance. Their image endures throughout Scripture as one of the most profound symbols of divine protection and holiness because of this tension, which is both beautiful and terrifying. While in exile on the rocky island of Patmos, John gazed up at the sky and saw a vision that would live on in the faithful's memories for all time. The throne of God was there amid lightning, thunder, and a sea of crystal-clear glass. 4 creatures unlike anything he or anyone had ever seen surrounded it, not as decorations, but as living things. The first resembled a lion with ferocious, royal eyes that blazed with power. The second carried the burden of sacrifice and service like an ox, steady and resilient. The third had a man's face, contemplative and thoughtful, the crown of creation endowed with free will and reason. And the fourth resembled a flying eagle with its wings spread, ascending to unimaginable heights, while possessing the speed and vision of the sky. Everybody had eyes on them, both in front and behind them, seeing everything and looking into every part of the world. Gathered around the throne of their Creator, they were more than just animals. They were the very essence of creation. These creatures never slept. They shouted in unison day and night, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Their chant and song never grew stale or lost their intensity. Imagine the sound, a rhythm that permeated eternity itself, reverberating like waves crashing endlessly upon the shore. Their admiration was based on their very being, not on their performance. They lived to exalt, and in doing so, they made the truth known. Everything in the universe, from the lion's strength to the ox's endurance, from the human mind to the eagle's vision, was made to submit to God's throne. John heard the universe's anthem in their never-ending song. These animals have deep symbolic meaning that reaches into the depths of divine mystery. Judah's lion, which represents strength and triumph, is echoed in the lion's words of majesty, bravery, and kingly rule. The ox, the unrelenting servant, who works without complaining, serves as a reminder of strength, endurance, and patience. We are reminded of intelligence, relationships, and the image of God imprinted on humanity by a man's face. As a symbol of vision, speed, and the spiritual heights that only God can raise his creation to, the eagle soars above all others. The wild, the domestic, the human, and the heavenly all come together to create a picture of completeness. They seem to have a voice from every part of creation, and all voices are raised in adoration. Imagine the scene as John might have witnessed it. The emerald rainbow encircling the seat of glory, lightning flashing in blinding bursts, and thunder rolling from the throne. It is surrounded by 24 elders who are dressed in white, have gold crowns, and sit on their own thrones. These 4 living things, however, are the ones closest to the throne itself and at the center of the vision. They are even closer than the vast throng of angels and closer than the elders. They simultaneously serve as protectors and worshippers, representing all of existence, raising their voices in a never-ending chorus. Their chant gets louder as they get closer to God, as if being so close to him demands a louder cry of glory. Picture yourself in that hall of heaven as they exclaim, "Holy, holy, holy." The words jar your bones and make the ground tremble beneath your feet. They don't whisper or sing softly. Their voices sound like trumpets, like the sound of galaxies spinning in time, or like the rush of many waters. As their chant fills the room, you can't help but drop to your knees. You come to understand that holiness is a reality rather than a concept when you hear them cry. It is thunder, it is fire, it is the pulse of everything. Repetition is what gives their never-ending chant its power, "Holy, holy, holy," 3 times, as though to proclaim completeness, perfection, and eternal truth. 1 time wouldn't be sufficient. It wouldn't be complete if it were done twice. However, the cry echoes across the heavens 3 times, reverberating into eternity. The elders react each time the creatures raise their voices, declaring that all glory and power belong to the one who sits enthroned forever. They drop their crowns and fall before the throne. Layer by layer, the cosmic choir grows until all angels and redeemed souls join the chorus of praise. All of creation yells in unison at the end, but it starts with 4 voices. These 4 living things serve as a reminder of the purpose of creation and are more than just symbols. Humanity frequently questions why it exists, what purpose it serves, and why life is short and brittle. However, the answer is evident in these beings' chant. We were created to exalt, to raise our voices in unison with everything else. Turning toward the throne brings fulfillment to the lion in its roar, the ox in its labor, the man in his thought, and the eagle in its flight. When we all join in praising the Creator, nothing is wasted or pointless. Despite their majestic appearance, the creatures serve as a reminder of our own insignificance. They see more than we do because they are covered in eyes. They see mysteries we can't even begin to understand as they gaze into the depths of creation. Nearer to the flaming glory than any mortal could bear, their wings encircle the throne. They demonstrate to us that God's closeness should not be taken lightly because they are both a part of and above creation. The one sitting on the throne demands that even the greatest symbols of creation bow, chant endlessly, and offer themselves completely. The way their song never ends has a certain beauty. Their chant never stops, unlike human voices that grow weary and our songs that fade into silence. They sing day and night, forever and ever, and they never get tired while they sing. It is joy rather than obligation. It is revelation rather than repetition. The chant grows deeper as they witness more of God's holiness, glory, and everlasting majesty with each cry. Their song never ends because holiness is limitless. Imagine the most dramatic and overwhelming sound you have ever heard, a choir that encompasses all of existence. Every bird taking flight, every ocean wave crashing, every star burning, every creature's heartbeat, all of these things join in praise. John saw that in the living things. They represented the cosmic unity of worship rather than being solitary entities. The eagle's flight, the ox's strength, the lion's roar, and the human mind all rise together in them. Since the one who sits on the throne is the source of everything that exists, the universe itself bows before it. You wouldn't just see a choir if you were with John and watching that vision. The declaration that God is holy would cause the entire universe to awaken, with each atom trembling. You would know deep down that there is only one fundamental truth in life. Everything is aimed at Him. Everything submits to Him, and everything exists to exalt Him. The 4 living things serve as enduring reminders that, whether we can hear it or not, the song of creation is already resonating. Their cries have never stopped. They are not waiting to start. Whether we will join them is the question. John saw a circle of people who carried themselves with dignity and awe around the throne, in addition to the living creatures. Wearing white robes and wearing gold crowns, they were 24 elders sitting on their own thrones. In the light emanating from the throne itself, the whiteness of their clothing appeared to glow with a purity untarnished by shadow or stain. Their glittering crowns were emblems of triumph and reward, but they were worn as presents that could be returned rather than being clung to as items to brag about. Even though they were all seated on thrones, the one in the center was far more brilliant than any of their authority. They appeared to be subjects eager to serve their king, even in their splendor. 24 is a powerful number in and of itself. It combines the old and new covenants, the legacy of God's people throughout history, and reminds us of the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. Some people think that these elders stand in front of the throne as representatives of humanity's history, representing the patriarchs and apostles themselves. For others, they represent the triumphant church, the redeemed, and a celestial representation of everyone who has remained faithful. Others still see them as angelic beings designated for the highest level of worship. Whichever interpretation is accepted, one thing is certain. They represent humanity's presence in the court of heaven, clad in Christ's righteousness, crowned with glory, yet submitting to the Eternal One. Their actions with their robes and crowns, rather than just wearing them, are what make them memorable. The elders respond to the cries of the 4 living creatures, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty," by removing their crowns, falling from their thrones, and casting them before God's throne. This is the most dramatic display of humility. It is a powerful gesture that pierces the heart. These crowns are not inexpensive decorations. They are the prize for finishing the race, the reward for perseverance, and the present given to those who stick by their principles through to the very end. To cast them down is to imply that, in comparison to God's glory, even the greatest honor we can obtain and the best of what we have are insignificant. Instead of being hoarded, the crowns are given up. Picture the scene. 24 thrones encircling God's throne, their inhabitants gleaming with triumph. All 24 stand up, drop to their knees, and remove their crowns with shaking hands in response to the voices of the living things. Golden circlets are flung one after the other down in front of God's feet, clattering on the crystal sea. In front of the throne, it sounds like devotion rather than disobedience. It's the music of giving up. All pride dies in that act. Every accomplishment is modest. No comparisons, no boasting, and no claim to greatness are made. Even crowns have no significance before the throne, unless they are returned to the one who originally bestowed them. Because we live in a society that clings to achievement, power, and recognition, the imagery strikes a deep chord with the human soul. People battle to wear distinctive robes, hold crowns, and sit on thrones. However, those who have been exalted to thrones freely descend and give everything away right here in the very center of heaven. It is the antithesis of all that the world teaches. The greatest honor, according to the elders, is giving up power rather than retaining it. Casting down the crown rather than keeping it is what truly brings glory. It is a lesson that dispels the delusions of ambition and pride. The elders' white robes have just as much significance. Scripture uses the color white to refer to righteousness, clean clothes, and pardoned sins. They wear robes of grace rather than ones they earned via their own good deeds when they stand before God. The one who occupies the throne covers them in a purity that can only be found in heaven. Their robes, a living representation of redemption, spread out across the floor like waves of light when they bow. They are redeemed by mercy, not by their own might. Additionally, their crowns are rewards bestowed by God Himself rather than the result of their own efforts. Since everything they own, including their robe, throne, and crown, was a gift, it is all given back to the giver. The 24 priestly divisions of Israel in the temple service are reflected in some traditions' depictions of these elders as heavenly priests. They carry the praise of all of God's people before Him in that vision, serving as both worshippers and representatives. Others propose that they represent the unity of the covenants, with the 12 apostles and tribes standing together in fulfillment. Without distinction between the old and the new, the Jewish and the Gentile, the past and the future, the history of faith comes together at the throne. Here, the elders stand before God, marking the conclusion of humanity's story. Their presence whether literal or symbolic, is a representation of completion, a circle around the throne that conveys the idea that nothing is lacking and that everything is complete. Their reaction to worship has a profoundly poignant quality. They don't just watch helplessly as the living things scream, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." They join in, their voices resonating across the heavens. Their song is not about themselves, their triumphs or their crowns, but rather about the one who created everything. They serve as a reminder that everything depends on him for existence, from the tiniest breath to the size of the universe. The elders give voice to the truth that creation itself bears witness to. To visualize them is to visualize a council in heaven that is not like any court on earth. The circle is lined with thrones, each holding a figure decked out in splendor. However, these individuals are not vying for power like earthly rulers are. They worship together. Their crowns are only used when they are cast aside, and their power is only used when they fall. In the scene, the humility of heavenly worship takes the place of the arrogance of earthly kingship. It serves as a reminder of what really matters in eternity and humbles and uplifts us. Imagine what it would be like to accomplish something significant on this planet. Graduations, wins, honors, and recognition. Imagine now taking that best moment and laying it down at someone else's feet with joy rather than shame. The elders represent that. They demonstrate to us that giving everything back to God is the ultimate act of worship, and that surrender is not loss, but fulfillment. Their crowns are most radiant when they are given up, not when they are worn. Their thrones are most magnificent when they are empty before Him, not when they are occupied. Their robes shine brightest when they are spread out in humility on the floor. The elders paint a picture of eternity in which worship is a posture and an ongoing act of surrender rather than just a song. The elders collapse once more whenever the creatures yell, "Holy." This cycle of surrender is repeated incessantly, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. As though every proclamation of holiness evokes a new wave of humility, their worship is a living rhythm rather than a stale repetition. They serve as a reminder that eternity will be about His glory rather than our accomplishments through their falling and casting. The elders make tiny gestures, thrones tossed, knees bent, words spoken, amid the thunder and lightning that emanate. From the throne, however, it is the most potent image of worship in heaven's order. It teaches that God alone is in charge of all power and that He has the right to give and take any crown. We are left wondering by their example. Will we cling tenaciously to our crowns when it is our turn to stand before the throne in white, or will we, like them, surrender everything? Daniel recounted a vision of heaven's courts, where tens of thousands upon tens of thousands stood in endless ranks, a scene that no human tongue could adequately describe. Instead of seeing them as disparate individuals, he perceived them as a vast ocean of light, with each angel radiating an unending brilliance that was as brilliant as the stars in the night sky. As though heaven itself were alive with undisturbed order, these creatures surrounded God's throne in a way that was both overwhelming and consoling. Centuries later, on the island of Patmos, John experienced a similar vision. He saw countless angels surrounding the throne, their voices resonating through creation like a wave of sound. It was a living testament to the fact that heaven's army never rests, never falters, and never loses its might. Not just a choir of hundreds or thousands, but a multitude so vast that it broke all numerical boundaries. The angels in Daniel's and John's visions played roles that went well beyond singing. They were not merely passive observers, they were warriors, prepared to battle the evil forces that aimed to taint the universe. They served as messengers, bringing messages from God to humanity at pivotal moments in history. They were worshippers, and the one occupying the throne was honored by their very existence, as though each voice were a single thread woven into an impeccable tapestry of sound. The roar of their voices rose like thunder, but within it there was harmony rather than chaos. This chorus was more than just music. It was heaven's very pulse echoing across space and time. Their praise is astounding in its sheer imagery. Imagine a chorus of voices so loud that the sky itself trembles, a sound that is both beautiful and soul-piercing, rolling like waves of thunder. Each angel contributed a note, a melody, or a tone that blended into the everlasting scream of glory. Instead of individuals demanding attention, they were a whole creation submitting to the throne. It was existence itself, resounding in worship, not a show. Hearing this choir would have given John, who was alone and in exile, hope, because it would have reminded him that although Rome ruled the earth, the true kingdom was populated by an uncountable number of people who were constantly proclaiming God's rule. Such numbers are hard for the human imagination to visualize. We count crowds in thousands and at most millions, but John's vision blew away human counting boundaries. The phrase myriads upon myriads implies an infinite sea of celestial beings rather than a specific number, implying that there is never a shortage of servants, guardians, or witnesses in God's kingdom. These angels are not trapped in the far reaches of the sky. Rather, they are interwoven throughout human history, showing up during times of need, delivering messages that change people's fates, or engaging in unseen combat. Every angel-related miracle in the Bible is merely a window into the larger host that is always close by and silently present around us every day. Symbolism abounds in their worship itself. According to John, the existence of such a huge number of people who exist only to exalt God is evidence that the Creator's might cannot be maintained by the feeble adoration of humans. The angels' thunderous song would fill the emptiness with unceasing worship, even if all human voices were silenced. As if each angel is drunk with the splendor of God, their chant rises forever, not out of obligation, but out of delight. They bow as beings who have witnessed the fullness of holiness and are compelled to respond, not as slaves. Their chorus is a testament to unwavering love, a love that permeates heaven's atmosphere and pours out into creation itself, in addition to obedience. Daniel observed how many angels stood in attendance of the Ancient of Days as he took his seat and the thrones were set up. Their presence was one of loyalty and alertness rather than fear. They stood like flames of fire on the brink of release, guardians of his throne and protectors of his order, waiting for his word. When the angels assemble around the Lamb's throne, in John's writing this is echoed, they erupted in song, praising the Lamb who had been killed and declaring him the object of all adoration. The parallel is remarkable. John saw them in acknowledgement of the fulfilled Messiah, while Daniel saw them prior to the arrival of the Messiah. From creation to eternity, the angels themselves bear witness to the story of salvation. Being surrounded by such numbers is more than just a vision for people on earth. It is a source of solace. In such a vast universe, humanity frequently feels small, frail, or alone. However, the Bible makes clear that heaven is neither silent nor empty. The unseen world is constantly filled with countless angels whose voices blend with the song of eternity. The human soul is reassured by their presence, that even in times of despair, the songs of heaven continue to rise, and that we are never truly alone. They observe God's plan being carried out, not indifferently, but with a common interest, joining those who are part of the Creator in battle and celebrating victories. Humanity is also reminded of its own calling by the thunder of their praise. How much more should people who have experienced redemption raise their voices in unison with heaven if innumerable angels can dedicate themselves to God's glory without end? The angelic multitude turns into a mirror, reflecting what creation was always intended to be. A chorus of voices proclaiming God's holiness without reservation, pride, or division. Their unity is astounding. No voice rises above the others in conceit, and no angel vies for attention. Rather, each voice is strengthened by becoming part of the whole. For people who frequently find themselves divided, it serves as a lesson in unity. The mind is left in awe by the enormity of these visions. It is beyond human comprehension to imagine a multitude of radiant beings filling eternity with thunderous praise. However, intimacy can be found within this overpowering imagery. The hardships of a single soul on earth are never overlooked if there are so many angels and they are constantly watching. Despite the size of heaven's army, it can focus on even the smallest detail. In addition to surrounding the throne, the angels keep watch over each human life, prepared to intervene at God's command. Deep solace can be found in this fact. No prayer is said in vain, no tear is shed in secret, and no act of faith is unheard. Therefore, the countless angels are more than just a magnificent sight. They are an affirmation of reality. Life, sound, and unceasing worship abound in heaven. The universe is resounding with praise, not silence. By creating a window into eternity, Daniel and John gave people a glimpse of what lies beyond time. There is awe and reassurance in that sight. Nations may rise and fall, humanity may feel vulnerable, but above it all is an unassailable throne encircled by an uncountable multitude whose voices like thunder proclaim forever that the Creator is in charge. Among the archangels, Michael is the most powerful and devoted of them all. His presence is like the clash of steel on the battlefield. As the commander of heaven's armies, and the warrior who protects God's throne from the rebellion of darkness, he is more than just a soldier in the heavenly visions. Wearing armor, his sword blazing with divine fire, and his wings spread wide, like a storm ready to sweep across the earth, his image has always evoked awe. Michael is the one who rises to lead the angelic hosts against the dragon and its legions during the great battle in heaven described in Revelation. He then casts them down with a wrath that reflects the holiness of the one he serves. By reading him, humanity is reassured that evil is never allowed to run amok, because a guardian is present to fight both in the heavens and in the invisible worlds that affect people's lives. As timeless as time itself, his mission is inextricably linked to upholding God's order and maintaining the harmony of creation. Gabriel, the messenger whose words have eternal power, is standing next to Michael. The sharpness of Gabriel's words, which cut deeper than any blade, is how his presence is felt in contrast to the warrior's sword. He shows up at pivotal points in history, such as when John the Baptist is born, when Mary is told she will bear the Savior, and when Daniel is given visions when the future appears unclear. Gabriel's job is to bring clarity and the breath of God into people's ears so that hope can be born, not to overwhelm with force. He is the embodiment of the reality that creation is never left in silence, and that heaven speaks into the haze of time at the appropriate time with promises that alter the path of fate. His words have a lasting impact, like a stone dropped into the oceans of history, because he uses his voice to reveal the eternal will to mortal hearts. His mission is inextricably linked to the narrative of salvation. Despite being less well known in the common canon, Raphael appears as the healer and protector of health and wholeness in Ethiopian and apocryphal literature. His name literally translates to God heals, and his work is demonstrated through acts of restoration and guidance. Raphael disguises himself to walk alongside Tobias in the Book of Tobit, which is preserved in traditions outside of the Western canon. He cures his father's blindness, drives away demonic oppression from Sarah, and leads Tobias safely on his journey. His closeness serves as a reminder that heaven cares about the little hardships of everyday life, as well as cosmic conflicts and prophecies. He stands for the God who empathizes with human suffering and heals souls that are troubled by hopelessness, as well as bodies. Raphael serves as a reminder to creation that healing and health are not random occurrences, but rather gifts from the throne, conveyed by the angel whose duty it is to be compassionate. In Ethiopian tradition and apocryphal texts, Uriel, the Archangel of Light, is a radiant figure who is frequently obscured from the mainstream of Scripture. His name, which translates to "God is my light," is associated with insight, wisdom, and direction in the midst of uncertainty. He is credited in some traditions with alerting Noah to the impending flood and showing him the way to human survival. He emerges as a defender of wisdom, the one who restores clarity to an ignorant world, by dispelling the mist of uncertainty and exposing the truth that corrects the course of creation. Uriel is the embodiment of the flame of divine understanding. If Gabriel speaks, Raphael heals, and Michael fights, then Uriel enlightens, providing vision where blindness reigns. Since all paths lead to darkness, his role is intricately intertwined with humanity's destiny. Through him, heaven proclaims that wisdom is offered to creation as a beacon to those who are willing to see it rather than being withheld. Despite having different missions, these four archangels work in unison to represent the entirety of God's care for the cosmos. Raphael restores, Gabriel reveals, Uriel illuminates, and Michael defends. Instead of being dispersed, their work is interwoven, like the threads in a tapestry that shows God's hand at work in every aspect of life. Imagine creation upheld by all facets of divine order, justice defended, truth spoken, life healed, and wisdom revealed, when you picture them standing before the throne. Their presence guarantees that nothing is overlooked, including the confusion of prophecy, the agony of illness, the darkness of ignorance, or the wars raging in the unseen. They are eternal companions whose missions directly touch the human story, not just celestial beings far from us. Their presence is enlarged in the Ethiopian Bible and other ancient texts, which provide information that is frequently omitted from Western traditions. These texts acknowledge them as living beings whose roles directly affect humanity's destiny rather than as abstract symbols. Uriel is referred to as the truth-teller, Raphael as the family restorer, Gabriel as the mystery solver, and Michael as the guardian of nations. Their stories influenced how believers perceived heaven's relationship with earth. Their names reverberate through prayers, and their images are etched into generations of faith. In Ethiopian tradition, Uriel is particularly revered as a bearer of divine wisdom, who is entrusted with secrets that help humanity survive in dangerous times. Such stories broaden people's horizons by demonstrating that archangels are not limited to timeless visions, but rather carry on with their never-ending missions. Their work upholds creation itself when viewed through the prism of narrative. Imagine Michael standing on the brink of anarchy, his sword blazing as he pushes back the advancing darkness that aims to engulf God's order. Imagine Gabriel entering a modest room and saying to a young woman in Nazareth the words that would spark the most significant historical turning point. Imagine Raphael walking alongside a traveler on a dusty road, his quiet yet firm guidance resulting in healing that restores faith as well as eyes. Watch as Uriel, holding a flame, warns Noah of the impending storm. His light illuminates the way to salvation when everything else is obscured by darkness. Every scene shows that humanity's history is never left to its own frailty without divine protection. The archangels are living representations of God's concern. Michael demonstrates that evil will never be allowed to win outright. Heaven is still, able to communicate, as Gabriel demonstrates. Brokenness is not the last word, as Raphael reminds us. Uriel reveals that light is available to those who seek it, even on the darkest nights. Their missions reach into every corner of the universe, and their presence before the throne is not passive, but active. Together, they represent wisdom, healing, strength and speech, the very qualities necessary for creation to survive and thrive. Thinking about them is like looking at a mirror of how heaven meets earth, how eternity stoops to lead people through conflict, bewilderment, illness, and darkness, always returning to the light of the throne, where they serve without ceasing. Scripture describes heaven as a place of unending worship, where voices, songs and chants rise like the very heartbeat of creation itself, rather than as a silent throne room. All prophets and seers who saw God's throne describe sound, not just any noise, but rhythm, harmony and order that flow like an everlasting river. In Revelation, John witnesses redeemed souls chanting words of holiness with thunderous voices and innumerable choirs of angels. The Seraphim's cries of "Holy, holy, holy" to one another cause the very foundations of heaven to tremble in Isaiah's story. Daniel describes countless people gathered before the Ancient of Days, their devotion so immense that it is unmatched on earth. These visions show that music is the very framework that keeps eternity pulsing, not just a form of entertainment, in heaven or a time-bound art form. In this heavenly world, music is more important than melody. It is the language of life itself. In the heavens, worship flows as power, but on earth, we think of music as a series of notes arranged in rhythm and harmony. Every voice, whether human or angelic, does more than just sing. It emits a reality, words that mold eternity, a declaration that trembles dimensions. Their chant does not become insignificant when the four living things scream non-stop day and night. It upholds the order of creation and reverberates throughout the cosmos. The phrase, "Holy, holy, holy," is not a repetition, but rather a revelation, with each proclamation revealing a previously undiscovered depth of God's unending holiness or a previously unseen aspect of His glory. Heavenly worship is dynamic, alive, and a force that unites all of creation. Think about the meaning behind these voices from heaven. Numerous choirs combining to create a single sound may seem overwhelming to the human ear, but there is perfection in it. It is a chorus where every voice counts but no voice takes center stage, a unity without losing individuality. Millions upon millions of people singing, yet all of them being one, is the mystery of heaven's order. Their harmony reflects the flawless unity of creation under God's rule. They serve as a reminder that worship is powerful rather than weak, and their sound is compared to rushing waters or thunderclaps. The throne of God reveals power through song, while earthly kingdoms do so through armies or monuments. The act of worship itself is an affirmation of God's hegemony, that no one else can challenge His majesty. There is a slight reflection of this reality for those who have sung in earthly assemblies, maybe in choirs or during times of group adoration. Something deep within the soul stirs when many voices rise in unison, serving as a reminder that humanity was meant for harmony rather than isolation. One can get close to what John heard when he described countless angels joining in a single chorus by multiplying that moment beyond comprehension. Heavenly worship is the natural reaction of creation to the one who sustains it, not a show for God's pleasure. The souls in heaven worship because it is the only appropriate rhythm of life in the presence of eternal majesty, much like lungs breathe air and hearts pump blood. Picture yourself in that chorus, a human voice raised with the voices of angels and elders, merging into the timeless song that never ends. There would be no stage and no distinction between the audience and the performer. Everyone would participate in the same act of proclaiming God's glory and be worshippers. The sound would resonate through every fiber of being, not just filling the ears, but also the bones. It would seem as if the entire universe were singing through them, their voices joined to those of the stars, rivers, mountains, and animals, all of which were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." The worshipper would then be able to join the eternal song that unites heaven and earth, erasing the distinction between self and eternity. This divine adoration also demonstrates the close relationship between order and music. On earth, harmony and rhythm are symbols of peace, whereas noise, dissonance, and disruption are symbols of chaos. Worship maintains the harmony of creation in heaven, with every voice in harmony with the will of God. The angels raise their chants, the elders fall and cast their crowns, the living creatures scream, and together they create an impeccable pattern of praise. Worship is not chaos, but the universe. It is not chance, but purpose. It illustrates how everything was created with a purpose, and how every element works together to form a magnificent song. A grand symphony aimed at the throne is composed of the roar of the lion, the cry of the eagle, the whisper of the wind, and the crashing waves. Worship in heaven also has a transformative power. John was in awe when he heard and saw it. Isaiah exclaimed, "Woe is me," when he came across it, because he was stripped bare by the holiness that was revealed through worship. Heavenly worship is revelation, not soothing music. It fills the worshipper with truth, burns away pretense, and reveals weakness. There is only unadulterated adoration, flowing from creation to creator in that timeless song. Neither pride nor deception are allowed. Heavenly worship exalts, not flatters. The universe is reoriented toward its actual center as a result. Giving glory is where all beings, no matter how big or small, find their proper place. One can catch a glimpse of humanity's ultimate fate by imagining joining that chorus. Scripture frequently reminds us that worship on earth is merely a reflection of what is happening in heaven. The eternal song that is already echoing around the throne is echoed by every hymn sung, prayer raised, and Amen whispered. When members of the congregation raise their voices in unison, they are not starting a new worship service, but rather joining an existing one. One's understanding of earthly praise is altered by this insight. It is a rehearsal of what will one day be unbroken and limitless, not merely a meeting in a room or a song played to instruments. The idea that worship is the lifeblood of creation should evoke awe and longing in the soul. Refusing to worship, if worship is power, is living out of harmony with life itself. The song of heaven proclaims that true power is found in surrender rather than in dominance or conquest, in giving glory rather than taking. Worship is life, not work, which is why the angels never get tired. Since only glory that reflects back to God is worthy of being kept, the elders threw off their crowns. Every moment shows more of him than the last, which is why the living things scream holy. Worship is an unquenchable joy, not a task that comes to an end. Imagine yourself in that sound, feeling the whisper of what was always intended for humanity, eternity embracing the present. One day when every voice, nation and creature joins the never-fading chorus, the song of heaven will no longer be far away, but rather close by, real rather than imagined. Together, they will be the purest language of existence, the sound of creation in perfect harmony with its creator, the song that has always been and will always be. At that point, music will not be considered art, and chant will not be considered ritual. The heavens opened before Ezekiel as he stood by the river in exile, far from his native land, and he saw what no common man had ever seen before: the throne of God, not as a permanent seat in a far-off heaven, but as a living chariot blazing with fire, driven by creatures that were incomprehensible. Wheels inside wheels spun in all directions, eyes wide, moving freely as if the laws of space itself were bending in front of them. This vision was one of motion rather than stillness, of freedom rather than imprisonment. The throne that Ezekiel saw defied all boundaries, in contrast to the earthly thrones of kings that are heavy, rooted, and confined to palaces. It was vibrant, dynamic, and a revelation that the Almighty is not confined to one location, but can move wherever He pleases, bringing His splendor throughout the universe. One of the most enigmatic images in the entire Bible is still the wheels. Inside wheels, they turned in perfect harmony, huge and brilliant, shimmering like beryl. A wheel inside a wheel may appear complicated to the human eye, but to Ezekiel it symbolized divine perfection, unrestricted movement. These wheels, which represent the limitlessness of God's throne, could rise, fall, or move in any direction without turning. Heaven knows no bounds, while mortals perceive them. Every eye set into the wheels attested to perpetual consciousness. Nothing eludes the one seated on this chariot. The wheels declared that God's glory is movable, all-perceiving, unstoppable, and beyond human comprehension. This vision was like lightning to a people in exile. Many people thought that God had abandoned them because the temple in Jerusalem had collapsed and the holy city was in ruins. But despair was broken by Ezekiel's vision. The God of Israel was not a regional deity restricted to a single mountain or a wall of stone. His throne roamed freely through heaven and earth, unencumbered by the destroyed temple. The promise that his sovereignty persisted even in exile and in Babylon was conveyed by the wheels within wheels. Because he was never bound by geography, his throne could follow wherever his people went. Loss on earth did not stop the chariot of heaven from roaring across creation to remind his people that he was in control everywhere. Later, Jewish mysticism created what became known as the Merkabah tradition, the study of the divine chariot, by deeply reflecting on this vision. Thinking about the chariot was an attempt to understand the mystery of God's mobility, his limitless presence traversing the worlds. Not everyone was allowed to think about the vision because it was deemed to be so deep and dangerous. It was said that some people could become depressed or insane if they looked too closely at the chariot's mystery. Others, however, experienced revelation and a feeling of being drawn into celestial worlds. In addition to being a symbol, the throne as a chariot offered a window into the immensity of God's reign and moved in ways that were impossible for humans to foresee. They coexisted harmoniously with the living things by the wheels. The wheels moved when they did. The wheels rose as they rose, as if the throne itself were an extension of their souls. Their spirits were bound together. Lightning streaked across. The vision, fire flashed between them, and the sound of their wings sounded like an army's roar or rushing water. There was a platform like crystal above them, high and exalted, and a sapphire throne above the platform. One, encased in a brilliance beyond description, sat upon it, glowing like fire and light. Overwhelmed by a glory beyond words, Ezekiel could only collapse on his face. The imagery of the chariot also has profound implications for how people view God. Earthly rulers are confined to their courts, and the areas they control determine how much power they have. Temples and armies may be destroyed, But when God's throne is viewed as a chariot, no nation, no enemy, and no exile can stop him. The wheels within wheels demonstrate that his rule is dynamic rather than static, and that he goes with his people into the most difficult situations. This implied to Ezekiel's audience that they were not abandoned, even though they were far from Jerusalem. For us, it describes a God who transcends space and time, who exists everywhere in the universe, and who is unconstrained by human standards. Think about the vision's emotional impact: the fire, the lightning, the roar, the eyes watching from all sides. It would be overwhelming, frightening, and incredibly reassuring. It was terrifying because it displayed God's holy power, which was magnificent, unstoppable, and uncontrollable. It was consoling because it demonstrated his closeness and presence, which were not limited to altars or temples. To proclaim that God follows his people wherever they go, the throne arrived in a foreign land to Ezekiel by the river. The chariot continues to ride despite exile and despair. The mystery of divine order is also represented by the wheels within wheels. Although the motion appears chaotic to the human eye, it was perfectly harmonious in heaven. The throne was not consumed by fire, the wheels did not collide, and the creatures did not stumble. Everyone moved in unison, demonstrating how perfectly heaven's will was coordinated. This teaches that in the heavenly realm, what might seem like chaos in the human experience is actually a component of a larger design. The chariot demonstrates how God controls history in a similar way to a great driver operating a vehicle. Even though the road may seem convoluted and unfathomable, it leads to his predetermined end. The way that Ezekiel's vision depicts God's throne as a moving force through creation itself, rather than as a fixed seat, also has a dramatic climax. Imagine a throne that is not restricted to heaven, but instead descends into valleys, rises above mountains, crosses seas, enters human cities, and burns brightly through the stars. Imagine its wheels turning in thunder and silence as it rolls across galaxies, knowledge blazing in every eye. God's presence is not remote, but active. Not concealed in a remote sanctuary, but moving with unstoppable purpose through all realms of existence, as symbolized by the throne as a chariot. It is a picture of unstoppable majesty and sovereignty. In action, this vision was a ray of hope for the exiles by the river. It serves as a reminder to us that God is nearby, confined in an inaccessible paradise. His throne continues to move through creation, his glory riding on wheels within wheels, his presence unrestricted by boundaries or walls. Carrying the King of Kings throughout the universe he maintains, the chariot thunders through the invisible. Every soul is reminded that God is unbounded and that he rules everywhere. His throne alive with fire and eyes, moving through creation itself when they catch a glimpse of it, even in their imagination, of the pulse of eternity rolling forward. Enoch entered a reality that was unlike anything mortal eyes had ever seen when he was carried past the veil of heaven. He traveled through worlds layered with fire, light, and mysteries hidden from the average person, not just up into the sky. He recounts being guided by angels into halls of glory and fire-filled chambers where the Almighty's presence seemed to vibrate the very air. The creatures of flame, archangels of immense power, and the Watchers, whose story is still one of the most contentious and suppressed in biblical history, were what most impressed him, not just the place's splendor. The Book of Enoch, which is found in the Ethiopian Bible but is not found in most Western traditions, describes these visions in such vivid detail that it challenges preconceived notions about what heaven and divine order actually entail. Enoch describes flaming creatures encircling the throne, their faces burning like torches and their bodies made of living flame. Despite their precise movements, neither turning nor swaying, their presence inspired wonder. Around them were archangels, each with a distinct personality and mission, rather than a generic spiritual form. Michael stood for justice and divine power with his warrior-like demeanor. As the messenger, Gabriel stood between the eternal and the temporal, his voice as clear as a bell but thunderous. Even the fear of divine fire was calmed by the gentleness that Raphael, the healer, exuded. Shining with light and wisdom, Uriel unlocked creation's secrets. These archangels, whose power was woven into the fabric of existence, were not abstract concepts, but rather actual guardians who stood before the throne. However, the Watchers were arguably the most enigmatic members of the celestial court. These creatures, who were referred to as angels, sent to watch over and lead humanity, carried a tale that rocked the heavens and the earth. According to the Book of Enoch, some of them broke their heavenly order and descended to earth because they were enthralled with human beauty. This led to corruption and the teaching of forbidden knowledge to humanity. They offered gifts that both empowered and destroyed people by disclosing the secrets of astrology, magic, war, and hidden sciences. The Nephilim, giants who violently ravaged the earth and drove humanity to the verge of extinction, were the result of their rebellion. Enoch's journey exposed their judgment in addition to their crime. He saw chains of flame that no creature could break, prisons where the fallen would be bound, and a warning that there is no way out of divine justice. As the vision progresses, Enoch is led through several heavens, each of which is full of wonders and terrifying creatures. He tells of mountains of fire and crystal palaces, rivers of flame that flow like living water, and rooms where angelic hosts sang hymns that rocked the universe. Enoch witnessed both the records of human destiny and the majesty of God's throne during these travels. Angels documented human actions, books were opened, and scrolls were spread out. Every action on earth had an impact on the heavenly court, which was a living tribunal rather than a passive one. The history of humanity has been preserved and will always be remembered. Enoch's account of entering the chamber of the great glory is among the most vivid. The ceiling glistened like a starry sky, the floor glistened like crystal, and the throne of God glowed with hues that were beyond the scope of human language. Innumerable angels surrounded it, chanting, rising, and bowing in unison. Even the brightest angels covered their faces because they couldn't handle the full brightness of God's presence. But humility was at the core of the vision. Overwhelmed, Enoch collapsed on his face, but a hand raised him up, reminding him that he was chosen to bear witness rather than die in awe. These revelations are preserved in the Ethiopian Bible with a depth that is frequently missing from Western traditions. The Ethiopian text describes Enoch's journey in startling detail, whereas Western canons highlight him briefly as a man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. Unsettling questions are brought up by this contrast. Why was this vision suppressed in so many traditions? Was it because it revealed tales of rebellion, judgment, and cosmic conflict that did not neatly fit into a controlled narrative, challenging established authority? Only in Ethiopia, where the entire canon resisted the eradication of other traditions, were these words revered for centuries, hidden from the rest of the world. Enoch could see the heavenly court nearby. The world of men was pressed up against its reality. The archangels were not passive observers. They influenced fates, engaged in invisible combat, and led the faithful. The fall of the Watchers provided an explanation for why evil occasionally appeared to be more powerful than humans, why knowledge could both save and destroy, and why people harbored both dangerous ambition and a divine spark. The delicate distinction between heaven and earth, light and darkness, obedience and rebellion, was revealed by Enoch's witness, which went beyond a personal vision. The human connection in his story adds to its eerie quality. Imagine accompanying him as he was led through flaming corridors, hearing angelic voices rising like thunderclaps and seeing books containing the names of people who had lived and perished. Your own story would be inscribed somewhere by invisible scribes who capture every action, word, and heartbeat. The court of heaven watched, judged, and prepared for the passage of ages. It was not divorced from humanity. A cosmic humility is also revealed in Enoch's story. He was elevated as a messenger, but not for his own sake. Rather, he was made to realize that the Creator was the rightful owner of all glory. The brightest lights, the most terrifying creatures he had ever seen, all hunched over the throne. Giving up was the essence of life, not a sign of weakness. Due to their refusal to submit, the Watchers found themselves in chains as they pursued their own course and will, recalling their position. Within the divine order, the obedient angels remained steadfast. This same decision, to bow in awe or to pursue forbidden heights, echoed the fate of humanity. The Book of Enoch endures because it bears witness to realities that are concealed from view. A universe full of conflict and beauty, mercy and judgment, is depicted through its imagery, which includes fiery beings, rivers of flame, the songs of eternity, and the Watchers chained. It serves as a reminder that there is a thin veil separating heaven and earth, and that beyond it is a court where justice is served, angels are on guard, and every soul is known. The court sat and the books were opened. Daniel's vision remains in the mind like an unavoidable shadow. Thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat, his clothing white as snow, his hair like pure wool, his throne blazing with fire, and his wheels of burning flame. Thousands and thousands of people served him, and streams of fire poured before him. The court convened in silence after 10,000 times 10,000 people stood in attendance. The picture was one of order rather than chaos or chance. It showed a court that was unlike any tribunal on earth, with the eternal judge sitting in the chair and watching everything. The weight by which lives were judged was determined by the contents of the books that were opened. Eternity itself depended on the reckoning of that one moment in the vision of justice that had been purified of illusion. While John's vision in Revelation is similar to Daniel's, it is expanded to encompass the ultimate conclusion of history. He describes a dazzling and dreadful great white throne from which heaven and earth fled, leaving only the throne and the judge who occupied it. The books, including the Book of Life, were opened as the deceased, both large and small, stood before God. Every word, every thought, and every covert action were recorded in a different book called the Book of Remembrance. None escaped the summons. The earth and Hades gave up those who had fallen asleep. The sea gave up its dead. No name could justify, no wealth could protect, and no disguise could last before this throne. The human soul stood naked and alone in the face of life's realities, and all distinctions of status and power vanished. The witnesses were living things, not just books. Angels stood in solemn ranks, bearing witness to lives watched over and protected. The elders, whose own crowns had already been cast before the throne, watched in awe while wearing white robes and golden crowns. They were not judges, but rather representatives of redeemed humanity. Like thunder rolling across eternity, countless angels bore witness with their presence rather than their words, serving as a constant reminder that people were never invisible. Michael, who had fought the dragon, Gabriel, who had sent out warnings and messages of hope, Raphael, who had healed, and Uriel, who had illuminated, were among the archangels who stood as well. Each had shaped the course that led to this last moment while standing on the precipice of human destiny, so their roles were not forgotten. The actual judgment, which weighed souls against eternal justice, was exact rather than random. The fire emanating from the throne, a representation of purity and consuming truth, was alluded to in Daniel's vision. The picture was made clearer by revelation. Anyone whose name was not in the Book of Life was thrown into the lake of fire, the second death, a place of separation and ultimate loss. It was the result of a life that was turned away from its source, not cruelty, The faithful, however, whose names were sealed by sacrifice and redemption and recorded in the Lamb's Book of Life, were vindicated by the same judgment. The court upheld the eternal order of God's reign by focusing on restoration as well as condemnation. This moment's imagery reaches deep into people's imaginations. Imagine the books spread out, enormous volumes spanning all of eternity, each page written in handwriting made of memory rather than ink. Every forgotten act of kindness, every secret word, every betrayal, every act of kindness, and every silent prayer that was never heard by another person are all documented there. With a clarity that is unattainable on earth, the soul stands before the throne and sees its own story reflected back. Excuses vanish in that moment, and the voice of truth becomes louder than thunder. Nothing is hidden because the throne's glory shines through every shadow. This vision has an almost intolerable tension. Imagine being encircled by souls from every country, tribe, and language in that enormous gathering. In front of the throne, a great plain was populated by both kings and beggars, prophets and skeptics, soldiers and children. The one sitting on it can't be avoided, nor can there be any distance. There is a heavy silence until the books are opened, at which point the eternal verdict starts. The soul understands that what is revealed is balanced with eternity. Awe, rather than fear, is the weight of the moment, because the Ancient of Days presence exposes reality and removes all pretense. The scene is one of shuddering delight for the faithful. The Lamb who was slain serves as an advocate, and their names are recorded in the Book of Life due to their blood-sealed redemption rather than their perfection. In the depths of God's mercy, their once scarlet sins are forgotten. The judgment exposes the greater truth of forgiveness rather than erasing the truth of their shortcomings. Hearing the phrase, "Well done, good and faithful servant," signifies that the protracted journey through hardships, uncertainties, and suffering has come to a successful conclusion. Others find sorrow in the scene. Defiance-filled decisions, instances where the light was turned off and love turned away, are all documented in the Book of Remembrance. The second death is the result of being cut off from the source of life, not a random punishment. Horrible. In its imagery, the lake of fire represents a place where the soul is separated from the Creator and no longer takes part in the everlasting harmony of worship. The realization that it was chosen, that eternity depended on choices once deemed insignificant, on words once deemed pointless, and on actions once deemed concealed, is what makes the moment intolerable. Not just the judgment itself. The great leveling of existence is the ultimate judgment. Earthly kings' crowns turn to dust, and once powerful empires vanish like mist. In front of the throne, the strong and the weak, the well-known and the unknown are all alike. In that instant, the truth recorded in the books defines identity rather than earthly splendor. Humanity was never alone. Every action mattered, and the universe itself bore witness to the course of history, as attested by the witnesses, angels, elders, and multitudes. The vision's immediacy is what gives it its emotional power. As the verdict is announced, picture the sound of countless angels' voices rising like thunder, their collective affirmation of God's justice. Imagine the wheels turning, the river of flame flowing, the books spread wide, and the throne blazing. Like fire, imagine the Lamb coming forward, radiant but scarred, the line of eternity marked by his very presence. Imagine hearing your name called, the sound reverberating throughout the vastness of heaven and earth, and knowing that this was the moment that all other moments were leading up to. It is a scene of ultimate clarity rather than just fear. Because when the throne is present, all masks are removed, and eternity turns into the mirror of reality. The final judgment is the revelation of what has always been written, not an external event. Standing there means confronting not just the judging God, but also the seeing God, the remembering God, and the eternal life-giving God. One fact keeps coming up in the visions described in the Bible: order, beauty, and deep meaning surround God's throne rather than chaos. A depth of symbolism that reveals something about God's majesty and humanity's place in creation is inherent in every being depicted around the throne. The four distinct living creatures, a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle, were seen by John. In Revelation, these were not picked at random. Rather, they represented universal truths that cut across all religions and cultures. The lion, which represents majesty and power, has long been associated with bravery, strength, and kingship. The ox, a patient and hard-working animal, is a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and service. The man is a reflection of reason, wisdom, and the special role that humans play in God's plan. Soaring far above the ground, the eagle represents spiritual transcendence, freedom, and vision. These entities come together to form a cosmic chorus of attributes that alludes to the one occupying the throne, a God who is the embodiment of all power, wisdom, sacrifice, and vision. These creatures are accompanied by the 24 elders, who are dressed in white and have gold crowns. They sit on thrones but never hold on to them. In a striking display of the utmost humility, their crowns are laid down before God. Whether they stand for the apostles and patriarchs, the eternally redeemed, or the symbolic entirety of God's people, their role exemplifies what true honor looks like: giving up power rather than gaining it. Innumerable and luminous angels also abound in the scene, acting as both participants and witnesses to the unending worship. They cry out to exalt the Creator's holiness rather than for themselves. Thus, creatures that embody creation itself, strength and sacrifice, reason and spirit, humility and obedience, service and praise, circle the throne of heaven. Christianity is not the only religion with this vision. The throne of God plays a major role in mystical traditions within Judaism, particularly in the visions of prophets such as Daniel and Ezekiel. With wheels inside wheels and living things with eyes, the chariot throne symbolizes how God's majesty is both incomprehensible and closely related to creation. The throne, or al-Arsh, is also regarded in Islam as a representation of God's absolute power over everything. The Quran tells of the great day when everyone will stand before the throne of judgment and angels surround it in unending adoration. In all of these religions, the throne is a symbol of God's proximity and transcendence, in addition to being a place of power. Or the understanding that creation, in all its diversity, submits to a single source, is the common theme despite the differences in language and details. Imagine heaven itself bending in adoration at the culmination of such a vision. The lion's roar turns into praise as it bows. The ox offers its strength in humility by kneeling. The man bows his head and acknowledges that without reverence, reason is insufficient. By folding its wings, the eagle gives up its height to the one who created the heavens. The elders drop to their faces and surrender by tossing their crowns. Thousands and tens of thousands of angels scream out until their voices resemble thunderous seas. What would it be like to stand in such a place? To feel the ground tremble with their praise, to see even the mightiest beings in existence bow low. The sound echoes not only through heaven, but also through the very center of existence, for at that very moment, all creation unites in one voice. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. It is both a mystery and a hope, because humanity sees promise rather than despair in these visions. If the ox represents sacrifice, it also represents perseverance and the belief that hard work is worthwhile. If the eagle represents transcendence, it serves as a reminder that our souls were created to soar above the earth's dust. If the lion represents strength, it serves as a reminder that God is the real source of courage and justice. If the man is a reflection of reason, then reverence is where wisdom itself finds its pinnacle. Even the highest honor is only attained in worship, as the elders demonstrate by giving up their crowns. The angels serve as a constant reminder that we are never alone, because heaven itself bears witness and supports those who choose to follow the path of faith. Therefore, in addition to being a mystery beyond human comprehension, the throne is also the source of hope. Humans are not excluded. If creation itself is humbled in worship, we are asked to join the chorus instead. Every deed of generosity, every fervent prayer, and every humble step becomes a thread woven into the timeless melody. The throne is not just a place to be feared. It is also a guarantee that justice, mercy, and love are at the core of everything. Even through prophetic visions, to gaze upon that throne is to witness the purpose for which humanity was created. To stand before God, not in exile but in awe, and not in despair but in belonging. We conclude by posing a question that cuts deep into our hearts. If the strongest creatures in the universe collapse before God, what about us? How should we live? In the presence of such a throne, if the lion roars in surrender, the eagle folds its wings, the elders cast their crowns, and the angels thunder in worship. The vision calls to earth, asking each soul to think about its role in the great assembly rather than staying locked in heaven. Friends, let this exploration of the mysteries of God's throne inspire you to take action. In order to help this work reach more people, please hit the like button, tell your friends about this video, and remember to subscribe to our channel. Together, we want to reach 10,000 subscribers. If this content has been helpful to you, you can also give us a direct thank you by using Super Thanks. Every small gesture of support enables us to keep producing content for you. Additionally, we would like to know what city and time you are viewing from. To help us get in touch with you, please include your name and city in the comments. Last but not least, the link in the description will direct you to the English versions of the 88 books of the Bible, as well as the Book of Enoch, if you wish to delve even further into these mysteries. Together, as truth seekers, humbled by mystery, and uplifted by hope, let's continue this journey. If the throne of God opened before your eyes, who would you see standing there? Not a painting on a church wall, not a symbol carved in stone, but the living throne itself, surrounded by beings of fire, light, and glory so overwhelming that human language trembles to describe them. The Bible says prophets saw this reality. They did not speak of it as a dream, but as a vision more real than life itself. When we think of a throne today, we imagine power, world leaders with their palaces, presidents in their seats of authority, kings and queens with golden crowns. A throne represents the highest point of rule, but the throne of God is something beyond politics or empires. It is the center of existence itself, the place from which all creation is ruled. Every star, every living thing, every heartbeat finds its order from this throne. Imagine the greatest kings of history, Pharaoh in his golden halls, Solomon on his majestic seat in Jerusalem, or Caesar with Rome's empire at his feet. Yet all their thrones crumble into dust, while the throne of heaven remains eternal. This is not a throne of human pride. It is the throne where justice and mercy meet, where holiness radiates like unapproachable fire, and where beings beyond our imagination stand in awe. Prophets across time caught glimpses of this throne. Isaiah, trembling in the temple, cried out when he saw it. Ezekiel, sitting by the river in exile, described wheels of fire and creatures with many wings. Daniel spoke of the Ancient of Days seated in majesty, while John in Revelation fell down. As he saw the throne encircled with rainbows, lightning, and voices like thunder, they did not invent these things, they witnessed them, and their words still burn with the weight of what they saw. Think of Isaiah's cry, "Woe is me, for I am undone." This was not poetry. It was the reaction of a man who suddenly realized he was standing before a holiness so pure that even angels covered their faces. Think of John, exiled and alone on Patmos. The Roman Empire had tried to silence him, but heaven opened and he saw the throne of God. That vision still speaks louder than any empire. Why does this matter to us today? Because every human heart longs for justice, for order, for a ruler who does not fail. We look around at broken governments, wars and corruption. We see leaders rise and fall, promises made and forgotten. But the throne of God does not shake. It does not bow to human power. It is the one throne that remains when all others are gone. Yet there is a mystery. Who surrounds this throne? The Bible tells us that it is not empty space. It is not just God alone in a vast hall. Around him are living beings, each one burning with purpose, each one carrying a role in the divine order. Some are called Seraphim, burning ones with wings of fire. Some are Cherubim, guardians of holy things. Some are elders clothed in white, crowned with glory, singing day and night. If you had the chance to stand there, what would your eyes meet? Would you see angels with faces of man, lion, ox, and eagle? Would you see rivers of fire flowing beneath the throne? Would you hear the thunder of voices crying, "Holy, holy, holy"? These are not symbols alone. They are realities so great that the prophets struggled for words. Imagine hearing the sound of wings so mighty they shake the foundations of heaven. Imagine colors not found on earth, brilliance that no artist could capture. Imagine beings who never sleep, never tire, who exist only to worship the one seated at the center. To see the throne is to glimpse eternity itself, and yet, behind all the majesty, there is something deeply personal. The throne is not just about power, it is about relationship. The one seated there is not a distant ruler but a father. The angels who surround him are not robots, but worshippers burning with love. The elders who cast their crowns are not slaves, but honored ones who freely surrender their glory. This is a throne where love and authority meet. The prophets were given these visions, not for themselves alone, but for us. They carried them through history, through scrolls, through the pages of Scripture, so that we could know. Heaven is not silent. The throne is not empty. God reigns, and around him are beings beyond imagination, waiting for the day when the veil is lifted and the whole earth sees what only a few prophets once saw. If your life feels unstable, if the world feels chaotic, remember this: above it all there is a throne, and at that throne are beings whose very existence declares that God is in control. They are not watching history like we do on a screen. They are part of the divine order, moving at his command, serving his will, surrounding his presence. And this is where our journey begins, not with myth or fairy tale, but with the most real place that has ever been. The unseen throne of heaven is not locked in the past or distant in the future. It exists right now. It is alive right now. And prophets of old invite us to step into their vision, to see what they saw and to feel what they felt. This is not just a story. It is a call to awaken our hearts, to realize that above our world of noise and confusion, there is a reality, more powerful, more glorious, more lasting, the throne of heaven. And the beings who stand there will be the focus of everything we uncover in this journey together. So before we move deeper, I invite you to take part in this journey with us. If you want to keep learning about these mysteries of the Bible, make sure to subscribe and help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Share this video with friends who are hungry for truth. If you'd like to support, you can use the Super Thanks feature. It helps us bring more of these teachings to life. And I want to know, which city and time are you watching from? Drop your name and city in the comments below. I'd love to see where this message is reaching. And if you want to go deeper, I've left a link in the description for the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English. That treasure is waiting for you. Isaiah wasn't a man ready for what he saw in an instant. The veil between earth and heaven appeared to separate as he stood in the temple, probably surrounded by the well-known stone walls and the sound of incense burning. In an instant, he was looking at the Eternal's throne rather than artificial altars or golden lampstands, and he was deeply shaken by what he saw. He was surrounded by creatures known as Seraphim, or burning ones, who were so brilliant that, even in their innocence, they covered their faces with their wings to protect themselves from God's radiance. They repeatedly exclaimed, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory," in voices that seemed to tremble the very foundations. It was a cry that pierced the soul, thunder wrapped in fire, not human chanting. When Isaiah saw this vision, he was not happy. He lost it. "I'm in trouble, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among unclean lips people. I am undone." No human heart could conceal its imperfections, and to stand before that throne was to stand before perfection. Imagine now that Ezekiel is a prophet sitting among exiles by the Chebar River, far from his native land. He wasn't in a holy city or temple. He was deprived of his country's glory and left in the dust of captivity. Nevertheless, the heavens parted for him there, in the midst of despair. He had never seen anything like what came to him. The indescribable, a storm cloud flashing with fire and creatures of living light emerging from within it, was something he attempted to describe. Each of their four faces, eagle, ox, lion, and man, unveiled a different aspect of God's creation. They never turned as they went, moving in perfect unison. There were wheels beside them. Not just any wheels, but wheels inside wheels, beryl glowy and brimming with eyes that looked everywhere. As if the spirit of the creatures and the wheels were one, these wheels rose and moved with the living things. A firmament glowed like crystal above their heads, and above that was a throne that seemed to be blazing with rainbow brightness and fire. Ezekiel collapsed onto his face. Mortal eyes could not handle the glory he saw. Then came Daniel, who lived in the courts of empires rather than in a temple or by a river. He had ruled under rulers who commanded armies and insisted on worship, kings who considered themselves gods. However, Daniel was transported into the real court of power in the silence of a vision, transcending Babylon and Persia. He observed the Ancient of Days sitting and thrones being set up. His hair was as pure as wool, his garment was as white as snow, and his throne was a flaming fire. With wheels, 10,000 times 10,000 people came to see him, and thousands stood in front of him. Judgment was ready, and books were opened. This scene dwarfed the mightiest monarchs Daniel had ever encountered. Despite Daniel's experience with visions, the fear and gravity of what he witnessed weighed down on him with an insurmountable force. Even though each prophet had a unique perspective, they all shuddered. Isaiah felt ruined when he heard the endless cry of holiness. Ezekiel fell to the ground after seeing unfathomable creatures, wheels, fire, and light. Fear gripped Daniel as he witnessed the majesty of God enthroned above all nations, with innumerable angels serving him. Although their visions differed, they were united by one truth: the reality of God's throne is too immense for human flesh to bear without shuddering. Imagine being Isaiah at that precise moment, seeing your own sin in the glaring light of perfection. If you were Ezekiel, you would see creatures with four faces moving in unison while their wings roared like rushing water. Imagine yourself as Daniel, standing in the midst of innumerable people and rivers of fire in the courts of heaven, and knowing that you are nothing more than dust in the face of such grandeur. Not surprisingly, all of them were undone. The holiness was inaccessible, the glory intolerable. Their testimonies are united not only by what they witnessed, but also by how it undermined their sense of humanity. Isaiah exclaimed that he was unworthy. Ezekiel fell back in wonder. Daniel acknowledged his fear as his strength failed him. Being human means being frail and constrained by sin and weakness. Every disguise must be taken off in order to stand before the throne. These men were mortals abruptly drawn into the presence of eternity. They were not flawless saints exalted on pedestals. Their fear was the normal reaction of dust before fire, not cowardice. Nevertheless, they were not destroyed by their visions. A coal from the altar touched Isaiah's lips, purifying them with divine fire as he trembled in his guilt. Overwhelmed, the Spirit raised Ezekiel and gave him the mandate to speak to his people on behalf of heaven. After being shaken by the sight of divine judgment, Daniel received the courage to confront empires and the wisdom to decipher dreams. They were all strengthened, even if they were broken. Despite their fear, they were all selected. This begs the question, how can frail human beings witness such splendor? In front of the one whose holiness shines brighter than 1,000 suns, how can creatures of sin and dust stand? Human strength does not hold the answer. Daniel lacked the courage. To face the vision, Ezekiel was unable to rise on his own, and Isaiah was unable to purify himself. God was the one who lifted, touched, and reached down in each instance. His strength was displayed on their frailty. Their testimonies continue to reverberate throughout history. They talk about the fear, the wonder, and the realization that God's throne is not a myth from the past, but rather a reality in the here and now. We are given the opportunity to see through their eyes, to stand in their trembling position, and to realize that the same throne is still in existence today, encircled by the same creatures and blazing with the same glory. What would happen to us if Daniel, Ezekiel, and Isaiah could hardly stand it? The idea is heart-shaking enough on its own. Few creatures are depicted in the visions of heaven with as much ferocity as the Seraphim, the flaming guardians who encircle God's throne. They are not gentle creatures, and their name itself is derived from a root word that